I think we'll go ahead and get started. So normally I have no problem with these presentations running over, but unfortunately I have something right after this. So I want to maximize our time together. Today's office hours presentation is on Microsoft Power Automate. Power Automate is also known as Flow. Flow appears to be the old name, and Microsoft's going through a rebranding effort. However, there's still Flow is used pretty heavily in a lot of places, especially you'll see it inside of Microsoft Teams. So we're going to walk through building a couple simple flows. Of course, these office hour presentations are meant to be very interactive. So if you want to see something, or you want me to expound on something that you see that you want to know more about, please feel free to chime in. Easiest way is to use the questions pane inside of GoToWebinar. Additionally, I hope to finish the core of my presentation in about 30 minutes, so that if there's something that you want to try and build or we can explore together, then we can do that. So what is Power Automate? Well, first thing we can do is, and I am sharing my screen. Okay. Go to window so I can see questions if they come in. Looks like we've got one. Yes, is this recorded? Can this be shared later? It is recording. All of our webinars are shared. You should receive an email after the presentation's over. However, they're also always on our YouTube and available on our website, rpic.com. So yes, great question. Alrighty, so the place to start is to go to flow.microsoft.com. So like I said, they're going through rebranding apparently. I actually think Flow is a better name than Power Automate, but it does bring them in line with some of their other tools, Power BI and Power Apps. Anyway, so what is Power Automate? Power Automate is, I would describe it best as workflow. Sorry, I'm trying to get the questions pane to work properly. I would call it digital workflow. It's also process automation. I wouldn't necessarily call it RPA or robotic process automation. It is that. But if you compare it to other tools that call themselves explicitly RPA, like a UiPath or Kofax RPA, which we work with quite a bit, it isn't exactly the same. And they seem to fit in a little bit different niches. The primary difference is going to be that most of the core RPA products approach automation from the standpoint of user activity automation, and it approaches it from the standpoint of desktop automation. Even if it's not necessarily using desktop APIs, maybe it's just using all web APIs, maybe it's doing web service calls, whatever. Most RPA tools are built from that perspective, at least most of the ones that we've worked with. Flow, on the other hand, I would describe as being more of a workflow tool, and really more of an integration tool. And so they can do a lot of the same things. And like we always tell people, as part of a digital transformation effort, there isn't necessarily any one tool that's going to be to solve all of your problems. A combination of process automation tools sometimes is the recommendation to solve different types of problems. The core, the main reasons that I really like Power Automate are that, number one, in its current iteration, it is all SaaS. So if you have Office 365, anything but I think the most basic level, you should have access to what I'm showing you today, and you can build it. And I believe it's free, or at least you get a certain amount of processing included with your subscription. There are some premium things that cost extra, which I'll show a little bit. But for the most part, if you are an Office 365 subscriber, especially as part of any enterprise or small business, you should have access to this. So there's no incremental cost to getting started. It's just your time. Whereas even the cheapest RPA tools, you're probably going to be buying a license. Maybe there's a trial, but this is free to use until Microsoft finds a new model to start charging for it. So that's awesome. I also like it because it's all SaaS, it's all cloud, it's the GUI. The user interface is really good. There are some things that I don't like about it, but we'll talk about that a little more. But more than anything, it has a huge library of pre-built integrations, especially with Microsoft's own products. But it really doesn't stop there. So you'll see there's pre-built integrations for Trello or Gmail or virtually any major tool that exists, and there's more coming out all the time. And then like I said, the real power, I think, is the pre-built integrations with Microsoft products. So you can link together or fill the spaces between Outlook 365 and Teams and SharePoint and Planner or Project or whatever tools you're using. And I think it's just really, really easy to get started. So we're going to jump in. Making sure I don't have any questions. No. I don't know what's going on. For any of the, if the organizer's still on, my questions pane is all goofy and I don't think it's actually showing. So if I do get questions throughout, please ping me on Teams or just chime in. Okay.
You got it.
So flow.microsoft.com. There's a lot of stuff over here on this toolbar. We're not going to dive into every single thing on this webinar. We're going to go directly to My Flows. And under My Flows, you'll see that there's a few things I've already built. And if I didn't mention this, I have built multiple flows to be used internally at RPI for systems automation. It is so easy to get started that that I just jumped in and started automating. And I've connected I'll save the use cases until after we walk through kind of what it can do. So today I'm actually going to build kind of a simple customer service app so that when a customer service ticket or request or complaint or something comes into our system, that it gets assigned to a customer service representative. And this isn't necessarily, I'm building this very simply as if you don't have a ticketing system or something like that, but this can be used even on top of that. So if you already have a help desk platform or something of that nature where you're receiving those tickets, you could still do the same kinds of things I'm doing today to help further automate. So it's not exclusive of those who already have a platform. So what we're going to start with is, so you'll see that there are My Flows, Team Flows, Business Process Flows, UI Flows. I talked a little bit about how this isn't necessarily an RPA product from the standpoint of desktop automation. Microsoft has other products for that. So there's something called WinAutomate, which is a more traditional desktop automation tool. You can use that in combination with Flow. We're not going to touch on that today. They also just acquired another robotic process automation product. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but the intention is to merge all of these together to be a more comprehensive single automation tool. However, even without that, I think that this is great. So the primary ones we're going to focus on, so UI flows are part of that as well. Primary ones we're going to focus on are My Flows and Team Flows. Really the only difference is My Flows are personal to me and restricted to being accessed and used only by me. Team Flows, I can take one of My Flows and promote it up and share it with other people. So Team Flows are anything that have been shared with anybody, and it could be shared with a group or an individual or anything like that. So Team Flows are shared with you, right? So we're gonna stick to My Flows. We're gonna do a new flow. And there's a lot of options here. I'm just going to talk about a couple. Instant is triggered from a button, and that button can be published inside of other applications, such as inside of Teams. You can have a flow page that has Power Automate buttons on it. You can do it from an app. So I have the Power Automate app on my phone, and I can use it to trigger flows or receive notifications or participate in flows. And so that's instant. Automated is what we're going to use. So I'm going to talk about that a little more, and schedule to schedule, right? So you can set it to be on a timer. And these are not mutually exclusive. You can have some combination of them. But for the most part, what you're probably going to be wanting to use are either automated or scheduled. And we're going to use automated. And ultimately, so I'm going to call this customer service assignment. So every flow starts with a trigger, right? And we talked about some of the triggers, buttons, schedules, those are triggers. The automated flows have more specific triggers. And in this case, they have some examples for you to choose from right here. Things like when an item's created in SharePoint. And you can specify when an item's created in SharePoint in this folder. We're going to use when an email arrives into a folder. In Outlook 365, and that should be in this list. And this is not comprehensive. We can go to the next screen to get the full list. See, there's Outlook.com, which is different than Outlook 365. When a new email arrives, v3. So I'm going to select this as my trigger and click create. You can also skip that step and just add the trigger here. So so you'll see that this is a step, right? This is my trigger, the very first step in the flow. And as I build this, it's going to cascade down the screen and left and right, depending on conditional logic and things like that. So this is automatically connected to, since I'm signed in as jmarney at rpic.com, it automatically uses those credentials for this inbox. So I have my folders in here, and so I can see I've got inside my inbox, I set up a flow folder. So we're gonna start with that. So when an email arrives in my flow folder, we're gonna trigger this flow. You can use a separate set of credentials. In fact, you can use multiple sets of credentials if you want to interact with multiple inboxes. I believe that's done right here. The little hamburger menu, if you will, the 3 dots, the ellipses menu. You can say, you see how it says my connections, and it's currently using jmarney at rpic.com. That's the default, because that's how I'm logged in. You can add a new connection. And I'm not going to do this now, but there are actually ways you can add connections that you yourself don't have authentication for, and ask someone else to authenticate for you for things if you want to build flows, say, for other people in your organization, like your boss or whatnot, where you wouldn't necessarily have access to their inbox, but you want to help automate around it. So I'm going to start with this. So basically just mapping out what I want to do. I'm going to, based on the from address of the email, so someone's submitting an email to this customer service inbox, I'm going to add some logic to decide which of 2 customer service representatives I want to assign this ticket to. One is John, that's me, and one is Michael, which is my coworker. I'm going to add a condition. I'm going to evaluate this email, right? And let me check the advanced options here. I don't think there's anything I want to do. Yeah. So you can do all sorts of criteria here as well, but I'm going to save that criteria and do it in the next step. So I'm going to do a condition, and this condition, and you can use this box to search across all sorts of different actions that you can do. You can use these different categories. You see that I can perform actions on Excel files, Teams, Outlook, etc. But I kind of know what I'm looking for. These built-in are more of the actual flow logic components, like your pseudocode. So you can see I've got loops like do until. I've got switches. I can terminate the flow. Things like creating variables to be used later. I have a condition that I'm going to add, and you see how it immediately creates this sort of evaluation logic up here, and then a yes and no column for what happens if that condition is true or not. So I'm going to choose a value, and here's where flow gets awesome immediately. When I click into that value that I want to evaluate, you see that it has this dynamic content. Dynamic content is any information used previously in your flow can be immediately referenced in future steps. And you don't have to add any code. You don't have to do anything special. What I want to do is evaluate the from address of the email that's being sent into my inbox. So I just select under this when a new email arrives, that's this step up here. And you know what I should do? Just as good practice, since I'm doing a training, I should rename this step. So customer service email arrives. That's the name of this step. Then I'm going to rename the condition evaluate from. Okay. So I'm going to choose a value. You see how now it says CS email arrives? That's the name of that step. I am going to select the from address. I want, and you can click these to collapse them. That helps keep this readable. I'm going to say contains, and I'm going to say rpic.com. All right. So if I get an email from any email address containing rpic.com, it will go to the true condition. Otherwise, it'll go to the false condition. So under the true condition, I'm going to move it to another folder. So there is another pre-built action to move email for Office 365. Now is the parameters it wants me to use for that email are the message ID. So I need to specify what specific email I want to move and what folder to move it to. Well, the message ID is the same email that we started with, right? Well, fortunately, due to this dynamic content, I can reference that very easily. You see there's a message ID right here. Boom. I don't have to know. It's dynamic. Folder, I can either use dynamic content if there's something as part of the previous message or previous steps that I want to use to assign to a folder, or I can select using this button from a list of folders in my account. And that's what I'm going to do in this case. So I'm going to go back to inbox. Oops, I don't actually want to use inbox. I want to use inbox, flow, and John. All right. And then if it's false, I'm going to do the same thing. Move email. CS email arrives. So I need that message ID. And I'm going to select a different folder. Michael. Okay. So true goes to John, false goes to Michael. I could go ahead and demonstrate that, but I'm going to add one more wrinkle. When this happens, and this is where, so this rule, as stated so far, could just be built inside of an Outlook rule, right? You could have it route based on an email address into a folder. But if I wanted to start bringing my automation into one place, let's say that when this happens, as part of collaboration, as part of notification, I want to write a message to our shared Teams channel to say, hey, we got a new email from so-and-so. Here's the subject line. Here's the body. It was assigned to this person. Then that's useful for a number of reasons. Maybe if that person stepped out, someone else can fetch that out of the inbox, the shared inbox, and work it themselves. There's a lot of reasons, but this is where it gets really cool to do all this in one flow. So this is the logic, and I'm going to go add a new step that's outside of the logic tree. So it's going to evaluate this, do the yes and no, and then it's going to move on regardless of which path it takes. I could continue to build it inside of the yes or the no, but I don't really need to do that here. So I'm going to go to Microsoft Teams. I'm going to, there's a lot of options, and we're going to dive into this a little deeper because it has some cool stuff. Where is it? I want to just post a message as Flowbot to a channel. I'm going to select RPI Party Bus. That's my team that I have set up for this. That's my business. And so you might imagine a party bus generating a lot of customer service complaints. And I'm going to select a channel, customer service. And here's the message. Here's what it's actually posting. And so I want to say new customer service request from put in quotes, and I don't have to put it in quotes. That's just to make the message neat. And then I'm going to use this dynamic content. Now this one's move email. So I have 3 actions that I can reference dynamic content from, and it's all the same email, so I can use whichever one I want. But just to be consistent, I'm going to use the original action. So you see I have this CS email arrives. I'll say from, I'll see I didn't put it in my quotes. From, regarding, then I'm going to do the subject, and then I'm going to put the body in there. Oop. And then I'm going to say this has been assigned to rep. And then, oh, I have a little bit of a stoppage. So when I was building this last night, I thought for sure, as a test, I thought for sure I would be able to reference the input of which folder I could use in a future step in the flow. Turns out you can typically only reference outputs. So I can't say if it went to Michael, automatically say Michael here, not that directly. And there might be a way through some little chunks of code to go back and fetch that. But just to keep this simple, GUI oriented, what I'm going to do is show you that you can use variables to do much the same thing. So I'm going to go back and create a new variable to store this information. I'm storing which folder it actually moved to inside of my inbox. So I'm going to insert it right after the email arrives. And I'm going to search for variable. And I'm going to say initialize variable. I'm going to give it a name of folder. The type, these are data types. If you're familiar with any type of software program, there's different data types like strings and numbers. This is just a string, and the initial value is blank. And then I'm going to go back into my evaluate statement. So if yes, and it goes to John, I'm going to add an action immediately after that to set that variable, folder, to John. And I'm going to do the same thing under the false or the no action. Set variable, folder, to Michael. And then back in my message that I want to post out to teams, I'm going to say this has been assigned to rep folder. Boom. That's it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick an email out to myself. I'm going to save this. And actually, right before they do that, I'm going to walk you through this console. So if you go back, so this is kind of your dashboard for this bot, flow, whatever you want to call it. And history is kept here. And you can actually see the execution history of every single time it's run. And you can see failures, you can see any errors it generates, you can see the action that it performed. So this is important not just for testing and troubleshooting, but for auditing. Is it working the way I expected? So, so it is turned on. This button to turn off would turn it off. It's on. You can see I have 2 different API connections that it's utilizing, or authentications. I'm the owner. All right. So I'm going to pop over to my Gmail. Send something to myself. Customer service complaint. I had a terrible time on the party bus. All right, and I'm going to send it. Now, this is going to go to my inbox. So just for staging purposes for demonstration, I didn't have it automatically go into that flow folder, which is what actually triggers the action. It's a little easier to demonstrate what happens if I do it that way. Okay, so pop over to my inbox. You see I've got my my complaint here. I'm going to drag it into my flow, and you see it's sitting there. And if everything works correctly, boom. So it went over to Michael folder, which is what we'd expect because the condition is if the email from address does not contain rpic.com or contains rpic.com, it would go to John. If it doesn't, it should go to Michael. Then, let's see if this worked. Oh, I can't see my other screen. Here is the flow message posted out to my customer service channel in RPI Party Bus team. And if you look at more, you can see the flow bot said new customer service request from jeremmarty@gmail.com regarding customer service complaint. That's the subject line. I had a terrible time on the party bus. So this is the whole body of my email. This has been assigned to Rep Michael. And we can continue to build on this flow to do all sorts of things. If I want to send a response to the, the person who submitted it after I successfully posted in this channel, then I can do that. Just add another step to the flow to send a reply. However, I'm going to take this in a little bit different direction. But before I do that, I just want to give you an opportunity to ask any questions about what I've done so far, anything I can clarify, anything that you find really interesting that you'd like to see more of. Feel free to throw it out there. I got a Microsoft acquired Softmotive. Okay, so that's their very latest acquisition. That was just a couple weeks ago. Thank you for that. Very clear instructions. Thank you. And I'm not the first person to do a webinar on flow. There are a lot of videos out there. However, I think in future iterations of this, I'm going to be showing some ideas on how we can do integrations with systems that that you use. And so I'd like to hear what those use cases are. Primarily, I'm looking at doing some things with Perceptive, with Symambase, with Kofax, and a whole host of other stuff. Okay, so no other questions so far. Oop. Shut off my Blizzard client. Probably shut off Steam too. Okay. So I'm going to show you another really cool thing, and this is where I think you'll start to get the wheels churning on some of the cool things that you can do with Flow, but also just with all of your products. I'm going to incorporate what's called an adaptive card, and the adaptive card is a message similar to this into Teams. However, it's interactive, so I can. What I'm going to do is now kind of put on a different hat. Now I'm customer service manager. And when a request comes in, I want to see what that email body is, and I want to select which representative it goes to. And therefore, the flow now is interactive, and it's waiting on me to interact with it to continue. So I'm gonna minimize my Teams, and I'm gonna delete this email. It's not of any consequence. I just keep it clean. And I'm going to go back to my flow, and I'm going to turn this one off. And I'm actually going to copy it because I want some of the stuff that I started with. And assignment, I'm just going to call it Customer Service Assignment Manager. And go to this one. It's off by default. So actually, before I do that, I need to copy something real quick. This is what I sandboxed this last night just to make sure everything's going to work. And I want to copy, and I'm going to walk through this. I just don't want to lose my, I have to do this in the middle. Okay. All right, we're going to edit this guy. So the trigger's the same. I still want this to happen when an email arrives in the inbox. And I still probably need the variable because I still am ultimately going to be evaluating a condition, but my condition's actually going to change. Now I'm going to use an adaptive card to evaluate which path to take. So I'm going to insert a step right here, and I'm going to go to Teams, And in here, there's a couple different options. You can post adaptive card directly to a user, which in the case of a manager assignment, you might do, like so other people can't click on the action in the channel. Just for demonstrative purposes though, I'm going to use the channel action. So you have post an adaptive card to a Teams user and wait for a response. I'm going to do post an adaptive card to a Teams channel and wait for a response. Now, in the real world, in a sort of a manager decision-making scenario, you probably wouldn't, like I said, post that to a channel or a public one. However, that might start you thinking, well, what if I want to do some sort of collaborative decision-making where whoever gets to it first self-nominates or something, right? Maybe multiple people can select what action happens. And that's definitely something you could do. So I'm gonna select this adaptive card. Again, I have to select what team, RPI party bus. I have to select the channel, which is customer service. So this is the complicated part of the adaptive card. Adaptive cards have a specific template and specific format to specify everything that is inside of them. What buttons, images, URLs, content. So whether it's a header or a body, it's a little web page that appears inside of your teams. And it's actually, if you're not familiar with JSON, it might be a little intimidating at first, but it's actually pretty straightforward to do a simple card. And I'm not going to walk through every variable. There's a ton of documentation on these. And in fact, there's even a little, a newer tool that I just found yesterday that's like a drag and drop visual builder for the adaptive card, and then it gives you the code that you need. So that's pretty cool. But I'm going to paste this in. So this is my adaptive card. And it's basically just a whole bunch of text between some curly braces. And the important parts here are that I'm defining a few objects, which I'm populating with information. So I've got a container. So I've got a type, a body, and then if I scroll past a bunch of this stuff, I've got actions. Those are kind of the three core points. It's an adaptive card, it has a body with some text in it, and it has some defined actions as to what we're actually going to do or allow users to pick. The rest of this is just text. And there's actually, a million different ways that I could approach this. I mostly copied it from a template, but I have some text saying at the top, a new customer service ticket has arrived, medium size, it's using word wrap. And then I've got blah, 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 blah. Please assign a representative, so in bold. Then I have a couple columns where it actually, I'm going to show you what these are, but it actually shows a little information about the representatives themselves. A couple images, then two actions. One is assigned to John, the other one is assigned to Michael. And importantly, they have an ID. These are action IDs, something to keep in mind. All right, so that is the adaptive card. The builder, just for reference, designer. Yeah, so I'm not entirely sure whether this is a Microsoft tool or not, but it says Microsoft, so we're going to say yes. But this is kind of what it's going to look like. You see this card right here. And this is the template I started with, so it looks pretty similar. So I'm just going to scroll past that for now, unless there's any immediate questions. And there's two more configurations that are optional for the adaptive card. One is update message. So once an action is selected by the user, what happens? It can either do nothing and maybe some other action is feedback for the user, or I can go ahead and give an immediate response. And this is not restructured. This is just a text message. So I'm just going to say, your response has been submitted. And I can actually even add dynamic content to sort of reflect, hey, here's the choice you made. Let's just do that. Your response, how about your selection of, and then I'm going to go into my dynamic content. I hope it's in the dynamic content. Since since it's still within the adaptive card action, I don't know if I can actually reference it. I can't. So we're gonna backtrack on that. There's actually probably still a way to do it using some expressions, but I'm not going to dive into that. And then should update card. Yes. So this is just saying if I have an update message, that it is going to update the card with it. Kind of a no-brainer. Okay. So now, like I said, we're done with the adaptive card. I'm going to collapse it so we don't have all this ugliness. Now, I'm going to change my evaluations to be, instead of from a specific email address, it's going to be based on the selection from the card. So I'm going to delete that. And you see here I have the dynamic content now from post and adaptive card to Teams channel. And what I want is that submit action ID. Now remember I said those action IDs are important. Back on the inside the card, I have two actions. One ID is John, one ID is Michael. So depending on which button is selected, it'll say John or Michael. And so that is what I'm looking for. So if it is equal to John, then it will go through this path and it will set variable John. And if it is no, it will set this variable, go to Michael. So in effect, same actions taking place, just different logic. It's based on user input. And then I still have this, that post a message to the channel. That would be kind of redundant in a real world scenario. So maybe, maybe what I would want to do instead is send a message to the user that it was assigned to. Which for time's sake, I'm not going to do right now, but that's an easy thing. It looks almost exactly like this. But in this case, I'm going to delete this step. Well, I'll just leave it. Should still work just fine. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Just doing a quick check for questions. I'm not seeing anything. And I'm going to back out. Oop. Okay. So I need to turn this on. And I will generate a new email for myself. So I'm going to pop back over to my Gmail, send another one to myself. Why did you not follow up with me on my previous party bus disaster? Every party bus I've been on has been a disaster. Save that, send, pop over to my inbox. Not there yet. There it is. So again, I'm just dragging it into the flow folder just for demonstrative purposes. So this should trigger, and it's not going to move until I interact with it. So I'm going to go back to Teams. You see in my channel, I have the flow has posted this this ticket. Oh, and you know what I meant to do? I meant to add the email information into this card so that you could more easily make a decision as the person who's assigning this. And we can go back and do that. But let's say I've reviewed it and I see, oh, look, what's interesting here is I could have hooks into the database or SharePoint or whatever I'm using to actually track this, or back to Outlook even, to say, oh, John is currently working this much and Michael's currently slacking off, right? I could have real-time information to help facilitate the decision making. And that's just more steps in the flow, right? I can query, I can, and it doesn't have to be a Microsoft system, right? I can go to ServiceNow or however these are being managed. Anyway, so based on the information here, I'm going to select, let's say assign to Michael since he's slacking off. You can see I select it and it comes back saying, adaptive card, your selection has been submitted, right? And then it actually immediately triggered that that message that we left in there from the previous flow. So minimize this real quick. Actually go over here. And you'll see that it has assigned this to Michael. And again, we can continue to extend this flow all the way as far as we want. We could have it automatically reply to the person or the submitter. What you would probably do is go ahead and send an adaptive card to the person it's assigned to, and have them click a button saying that I accept this ticket. Then it triggers the email response. Otherwise, you might need to reassign it based on workload or what have you. So that is so that's adaptive cards. I have some more stuff to talk about if there's no questions or anything that you'd like to see. I guess if nothing else, are the attendees finding this interesting? Are you seeing use cases for this? I find this to be tremendously useful. I've set up. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that I've done. We are using Expensify for our expense reporting. So expense entry, reimbursement out of our financial system, and for expense approvals. And so, Expensify interfaces with our financial software, but we've also implemented MavenLink. If you've done any projects with us in the last 6 or 9 months, MavenLink is our project management or software or our professional services automation software. And invoices actually get generated out of that software to our clients. And so we needed to take our expense information, because vast majority of our expenses are through client projects that we need to bill our clients for to get reimbursed for travel. Not that we're doing a lot of it right now. So we needed to pull expense reports out of our expense report software, submit them into MavenLink, which is our professional services automation and invoicing software, and then it actually circles back to financial system. And so we did all of that in Flow. We connected the systems, we rolled it out. It runs on a schedule, but we could have other triggers. And so that had tremendous value, because otherwise we're having to collect that information out of Expensify and basically input it manually into MavenLink, which that's just a disaster. Additionally, then we're able to leverage the integration we already had between MavenLink and our financial system, instead of having to build or use something completely different. Another thing that I have used it for is time card reminders. So I think this is something that plagues every organization ever, is getting employees to input time accurately and consistently. So our expectation to our employees is daily time entry, so that you don't get to the end of the week trying to fill out your time card. And so I built a bot that runs every day at 10 a.m. that goes out to the timekeeping system, which is also MavenLink, and fetches all of the time entry records and performs some logic on it to determine whether it's completely entered, and then does 3 different things. If it's under the highest threshold, it just sends that person a personal message in Teams saying, hey, can you please enter your time? The second step, if it's even worse, or if they're further behind, is it does that, plus it sends an email to them and to their manager saying, hey, your time isn't up to date. The third step is that it actually posts a public shaming content in Teams to call out that individual for not having their time entry up to date. And that's rarer, right? That's the worst case scenario. So that's something that I have built as well. So okay, since I've chatted a little bit, we've gotten a couple questions. You can throw those JSON options into an email as well, right? So if the question is, can you drive additional automation from email instead of interacting through Teams? The answer is yes. It's not quite as straightforward. Well, it is. It's just you're not really doing anything special inside of email. Although you can have adaptive cards in email. So yeah, actually, I guess it pretty much is the same. However, if I were doing it in email, I would probably use the flow as a relay where it sends an email and then you monitor for a response, because people are used to using email as email and not as a collaboration tool. But it's definitely possible. Very helpful, thank you. How do you connect SQL Server data and send reminders using Flow? Okay, I can probably demonstrate that. Biggest problem is having a SQL Server handy that actually has any data in it, but I think I can do it. So it's really pretty straightforward. If I go back to the flows, before I do that, I'm going to show one last thing. So I'm going to disable this one, and just to sort of demonstrate some of the additional power. So we talked about the different triggers. Well, what if a trigger is from an outside system? What if I have I need to make a web service call that triggers a flow, or I just want to set up a web service that is for my organization that can be called externally or internally or whatever. You can very easily set up a flow to have a REST post call trigger. And I'm not going to rebuild it. I'm just going to show you the one that I already built. And I just have it called customer service incoming form. So the idea is I have a piece of forms building software. And there's a ton of form builders out there. There's Microsoft Forms. There's Yoga Forms, which is what we have as our product. And from that form submission, when the user clicks send or submit or what have you, or save, that form software sends the image and the data over to this REST call to be submitted into our systems. So I can publish a form on my website that gets submitted and triggers a flow. And really the only difference is that you change your trigger to be this HTTP request received. You specify the body, like the data that you're expecting to get, and it generates this URL for you, which you then plug into. And I don't have time to show all of it, but just as a mock-up, Postman is a tool used to test web service calls. And if I go to here, I pasted that URL in. It's a post call, and I go to the body, and I just have this this very simple body where I'm saying who it's assigned to, and I'm passing a URL. And if I send that, I should get a 202 accepted. And back here, I wonder if I broke my flow earlier. Oh, I know what it is. Sorry. I need to go to the post a message, customer service. I changed my channel. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to re-trigger it. Web service call. Back here, see, I have a post in my channel saying that I have an inbound action. So the first two flows we built were triggered by the receipt of an email. You know, if I'm integrating with an existing ticketing system or something, that's not typically going to be what triggers that kind of functional flow. It's probably going to be a call either to or from the ticketing system. And then from here, I could still have an adaptive card to go back to whatever the source was and assign it to the user in that system. So I can turn Teams especially, but really the Microsoft suite into a collaborative, interactive workflow platform. So this is really just the tip of the iceberg. All right, so let's take a look at the SQL. It's really about as simple as you might expect. Oops. So I'm going to disable. I'm going to disable this form now. Okie doke. Let's go to the first one I built. Let's turn it on. Edit. So I have customer service email arrives. I initialize the variable. I decide who it's from, or if it's from rpic.com, it goes to one person. So what's our scenario? Before I assign it, I want to, maybe I want to take that from address or subject line and see if it's within a database that I've already populated with customer service tickets, right? That's my database for tracking tickets. So maybe the first thing I do is I want to run a query before I even do my evaluation. So I add an action, look for SQL. So this is good that I'm showing this because you'll see that some of these say premium next to them. Those do or are supposed to have an additional cost depending on how much they're used, depending on your license level. It's going to be transactional, so you'll just incur it as it's used. Typically for sandboxing, I don't think that it actually incurs anything, but again, that's dependent on your license level. So you need to just check with Microsoft or your Microsoft partner to see what your situation is. But you'll see that there are SQL query or SQL integrations in here. If I want to execute a SQL query, authentication type. So this does have to be available to the flow. Now, if you have your database in Azure, you're good to go, which means you can either do, if your AD is in Azure, you can just do it this way. Which I happen to have. Otherwise, you would have to have this exposed publicly somewhere or through a gateway. Most SQL servers are behind a firewall. There's ways around that too. I just went ahead and did the Azure authentication. Of course, I just deleted all my databases in Azure. But it would be here, and you can type in your query right here, and it would, and we're unfortunately running out of time anyway, but let's see if we can explore. I'm going to delete this and do SQL. No, see, I want it to go back to, I want it to re-authenticate me so I can point it at a, here we go. Yeah, actually, I don't have a database. So that's something I'll take away as something maybe to prep for a future webinar. But realistically, if you would use this, select your database, throw your select statement in there with table and schema, and it would return results in a CSV format, more than likely, which is good because handling results in that format is really easy. What that allows you to do is further on, it shows every column in your dynamic content. Now, since it's going to return it as an array though, an array of rows. So you have multiple results. Even if you have one, it's going to treat it as an array. And so there you would actually need to implement a loop control, either unapply to each, but probably a do until, to loop through those results. And that does get more complicated. So again, good goal for next time. So thanks for clarification, no problem. Any difficulties during web scraping? So I think, Sean, what you mean by that is the UI tool. So if I go back, I'm not saving that, and I go to these UI flows, I have played around with this a bit. This is where you actually install a plugin, and you can do something closer to desktop automation by diving into web pages, and it can automate through web form entry and web scraping and things like that. I did not find this, it's Selenium is the name of the tool right here. I did not find it to be particularly useful. I think if you need to do that, you're better off using the WinAutomate, which is their more comprehensive RPA tool, or maybe the new one. Things like that, Flow does not shine well. The other tool that we use primarily, Kofax RPA, is awesome at that kind of thing. So if you need to approach this from sort of that end user perspective, where we need to navigate to a website, scrape some data off of a page, or enter data in a page, this isn't that great at it. However, I do think that if you approach every problem from that standpoint, you're kind of missing the point. Leveraging the automation tools that are built in are always going to be better than trying to go through some front end screen scrape. Okay. That is my webinar. I appreciate everyone attending. Again, the content will be posted and made available, so please share. If you're interested in exploring this further, please reach out to me. Again, your barrier to entry on this, if you're already in Office 365, is extremely low. So let's talk about some use cases. I'll help you architect how this might work in your environment. Let's have that conversation. So outside of that, please feel free to submit ideas for future content, whether it's about Power Automate or anything else. I do these about once a month, and I spend a ton of time preparing because it gives me a chance to learn more about some tools, and it helps me help you. So thanks for joining, and everyone have a wonderful weekend.